Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto became a Marine Admiral and fell in love with Hina and Tashigi? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Yellow Flash of Justice. The air on the Isle of Kujiro tasted of salt and smoke. Fires clawed at the slate-roofed buildings of the port town, their angry orange glow reflecting in the pools of seawater and blood that slicked the cobblestone streets. The screams of the panicked and the roar of the pirates had merged into a single, desperate cacophony. From the deck of her command ship, Rear Admiral Hina watched the chaos unfold with a frustratingly calm exterior that betrayed none of the cold fury coiling in her gut. Her white marine coat, draped over her shoulders like a cape, snapped in the wind. A stark contrast to the grime and destruction below. "Status report," she demanded, her voice cutting through the noise on the bridge. Now, a flustered communications officer nearly fumbled his den mushi. Rear Admiral Captain Tashigi's unit is pinned down in the market square, trying to hold a line for the civilian evacuation. The Crimson Chain pirates have deployed their sea beast sea cannons on the eastern dock. They're tearing our forward ships to shreds. We can't get close. Hina clenched a gloved fist. The Crimson Chain pirates, led by the monstrous Captain Baraku, the Butcher, were animals. They didn't just raid, they savored destruction. Their signature weapons, colossal, enraged sea creatures chained to massive cannons, were a strategic nightmare. You couldn't destroy the cannons without killing the beasts and bringing the full wrath of animal rights activists and complicated political bodies down on your head. You couldn't ignore them, either, as another volley of explosive shells turned a marine frigate into a splintered ruin. Hina is frustrated, she murmured to herself, a verbal tic that always surfaced when her plans were systematically dismantled. Tell all ships to pull back and form a defensive perimeter. We will contain them. We cannot win a direct assault. It was a bitter pill to swallow, admitting defeat, but her primary duty was to her soldiers. She would not send more of them to die in a pointless charge. Down in the heart of that hell, Captain Tashigi felt the vibration of another explosion through the soles of her boots. She parried the clumsy slash of a pirate twice her size, sidestepped his lunge, and brought the hilt of her katana, Shigur, up under his chin with a sharp crack. He went down in a heap. She didn't have time to watch him fall. 3 more took his place, their eyes wild with bloodlust. "Hold the line," she yelled, her voice hoarse. Her unit, a small platoon of brave but hopelessly outmatched Marines, was forming a living wall between the pirates and a narrow alley where dozens of civilians huddled. "Do not let them break through." A pirate with a jagged cutlass charged her, screaming. Tashigi met his blade with a shower of sparks. Her mind was a whirlwind of calculations, the angle of his attack, the position of her feet, the 2 other pirates flanking her left. She was a master of the sword, her body a blur of precise, elegant movements. But skill had its limits against brute force and overwhelming numbers. For every pirate she disarmed or incapacitated, 2 more surged forward. The line was shrinking, her marines were falling. Desperation, cold and sharp, began to prick at the edges of her focus. They weren't going to make it. And then, the sky screamed. It wasn't the sound of a cannonball. It was a high-pitched whistle that cut through the din of battle, drawing every eye upward. A tiny speck of gold and black descended from the heavens, growing larger at an impossible speed. It wasn't falling, it was diving. The speck slammed into the center of the town square with the force of a meteor. The cobblestones cracked, throwing up a cloud of dust and debris, but the impact was strangely contained. More of a concussive thump than an explosion. The fighting faltered. Pirates and Marines alike stared at the small crater, weapons held in a state of suspended animation. A figure rose from the center of the impact zone, patting dust from a magnificent white admiral's coat that was lined with vibrant orange flames and had the kanji for justice emblazoned in black on the back. He wore a standard Marine officer's uniform underneath. But nothing about him was standard. His hair was a shocking shade of sun yellow, spiked and untamable. 3 faint, whisker-like marks adorned each of his cheeks, and his eyes were the color of the deep, clear ocean. He stretched his arms over his head, letting out a loud, satisfying groan, as if he'd just woken from a nap. Captain Baraku, a giant of a man with a metal jaw and arms like tree trunks, threw his head back and laughed. The sound was like rocks grinding together. Well, look what we have here. The world government sends a single, pretty boy admiral to face me. Did they run out of real soldiers? The young admiral ignored him, his blue eyes scanning the scene. He saw the burning buildings, the cowering civilians, and Tashigi's beleaguered unit. A flicker of something hard and cold passed through his gaze, just for a second, before it was replaced by a look of serene confidence. He finally turned his attention to Baraku. You the one in charge of this mess? He asked, his voice casual, friendly even. Baraku puffed out his chest. I am Captain Baraku, and this island is mine. Right. Well, Baraku, the admiral said, taking a single step forward. Party's over. He vanished. He didn't run, didn't blur. One moment he was there, the next he was gone. Baraku's eyes widened in confusion, his victory speech dying in his throat. A searing pain erupted from his stomach. He looked down to see the admiral standing behind him now, one hand tucked casually in his pocket. Baraku crumpled to his knees, clutching his midsection, the wind knocked clean out of him. He hadn't even seen the blow. The admiral cracked his knuckles. He looked out at the sea of stunned pirate faces, a wide, almost feral grin spreading across his own. Okay, who's next? That broke the spell. With a collective roar, 100 pirates surged toward him. The admiral just stood there, his grin never wavering. He brought his hands together in a simple cross-shaped seal. Multi-shadow clone jutsu. The air itself seemed to ripple. In a series of smokeless puffs, the square was suddenly, impossibly, filled with him. Hundreds of identical, yellow-haired admirals stood shoulder to shoulder, each with the same confident grin. Tashigi stared, her mind refusing to process what she was seeing. Was this a devil fruit? Some advanced illusion? It felt real. The original, or the one she assumed was the original, pointed a thumb towards the alley full of civilians. All right, guys, you know the drill. Group A, get the people out of here. Group B, you're on pirate duty. Group C, let's go take care of those big, noisy pets on the dock. Let's get this cleaned up, I'm starving. The clones let out a unified, enthusiastic cheer and broke off with terrifying efficiency. One group, moving with disciplined precision, formed a perfect cordon around Tashigi's unit, creating a safe corridor for the civilians to escape. They were gentle, reassuring, lifting Ildren into their arms and guiding the elderly with a steady hand. Another wave crashed into the pirate mob. It wasn't a battle, it was a dismantling. The clones fought with a fluid, unpredictable style of hand-to-hand combat that seemed to be everywhere at once. They disarmed, disabled, and subdued the pirates with swift, non-lethal efficiency, piling them up for the bewildered Marines to cuff. From the bridge of her ship, Hina watched through her binoculars, her mouth slightly agape. Her communication officers were screaming reports into their den mushis, their voices a mixture of awe and disbelief. Sir, the entire eastern flank of pirates has been subdued. The market square is clear. The clones are tying them up, ma'am. Civilian evacuation is proceeding at 100% efficiency. Hina lowered her binoculars. She was witnessing a masterclass in tactical deployment. He hadn't just thrown bodies at the problem. He had deployed specialized units to address every single objective simultaneously. He was a one-man army. Who, she breathed, is that? Her first mate, a grizzled veteran, swallowed hard. That, Rear Admiral, is the Koryu. The Yellow Dragon. The LD government's newest and most unpredictable admiral. Tashigi found herself standing uselessly as a dozen of the admiral's clones systematically took down the pirates she had been struggling against for the past hour. They moved with a synergy that was mesmerizing, each one seeming to know what the others were going to do before they did it. She watched as one clone ducked under a sword swing, allowing another to sweep the pirate's legs, while a third caught the falling sword in midair. It was flawless. The third group of clones had already reached the docks. They swarmed the sea beast cannons, not attacking the creatures, but the mechanisms. They dismantled the chains with practiced ease, soothing the enraged beasts with a strange, calming energy. Meanwhile, the original admiral, Naruto Uzumaki, was already moving toward the biggest threat. He ran straight up the side of a 3-story warehouse, his feet sticking to the wood as if gravity were a mere suggestion. Leaping from the roof, he soared through the air, his orange-lined coat billowing behind him like the wings of a mythical bird. He extended his right hand, and in its palm, a swirling sphere of violent, blue energy materialized. Churning and screaming like a miniature typhoon. Rasengan. His voice boomed across the water. He slammed the sphere into the base of the largest sea beast cannon. There was no fire, no shrapnel. Just a deafening grinding sound and a contained blast of concussive force that twisted the multi-ton steel cannon into a mangled sculpture of scrap metal. The cannon platform collapsed, but the sea beast it was attached to was unharmed, simply looking confused by the sudden release of its bonds. Naruto landed lightly on the dock railing, already forming another sphere in his hand, this one much larger. Great Ball Rasengan. He launched it like a cannonball, and it flew across the dock, striking the remaining 2 cannons and obliterating them in the same, strangely clean fashion. The battle was over. From the moment the yellow flash had landed to the destruction of the final cannon, less than 10 minutes had passed. As his clones dissipated into puffs of smoke, Naruto strolled through the now pacified port town as if he were out for a morning walk. The sheer, overwhelming power he had just displayed seemed to roll off him, replaced by an easy-going, approachable aura. He gave a thumbs up and a blinding grin to a small boy who was peeking out from behind his mother's skirt. He paused to help a young marine lift a heavy piece of rubble that was blocking a path. He then spotted Tashigi, who was still trying to reconcile the goofy, grinning man before her with the unstoppable force of nature she had just witnessed. He walked right up to her, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners. "Hey, you were great back there," he said, nodding towards her katana. "Your sword work is really clean. Fast, too. You must train a lot." Tashigi felt a hot blush creep up her neck. She stood straighter, clutching Shigur's hilt. Thank you, Admiral Koryu, sir," she stammered, cursing herself for sounding like a flustered cadet. He waved a hand dismissively. "Nah, none of that, sir, stuff. Just Naruto is fine. All that formality gives me a headache." Just then, Hina arrived, flanked by 2 of her subordinates. Her expression was perfectly composed, but her eyes were sharp, analytical. Taking in every detail of the man in front of her. "Admiral Koryu," she said, her voice smooth and even. "On behalf of the 77th Marine Branch, I thank you for your timely intervention. Your methods are unorthodox, but undeniably effective." Hina is impressed. Naruto's grin widened. "Glad I could help. To be honest, I was just in the neighborhood and heard a commotion." He then rubbed his stomach, which let out a comically loud growl. "Man, all that fighting really works up an appetite. I'm starving." He looked from Hina's composed face to Tashigi's still flustered one. "I heard there's a place on the next island that makes some killer miso ramen. You 2 should join me." "My treat." Tashigi's jaw dropped. An admiral was casually inviting a captain and a rear admiral out for noodles. It was unheard of. It was completely unprofessional. Hina, however, raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. Hina is not opposed to the idea. After the reports are filed. Naruto beamed, a smile so genuine and bright it seemed to push back the lingering smoke and shadows of the battle. "Awesome. It's a date, then." Far away, in a silent, opulent amber deep within the heart of Mariajoy, one of the 5 elders, the tall one with the flowing white beard and the pristine white gi, who always held his long sword, set down a report on a polished wooden table. A single, flickering candle flame was the only light, casting long shadows across his deeply wrinkled face. The report was a preliminary summary of the incident on the Isle of Kajuro. He stared at the document, his ancient eyes betraying nothing. His fingers, however, were clenched so tightly around the hilt of his sword that his knuckles were bone white. He resolves conflicts with overwhelming force, yet inspires loyalty instead of fear, the elder said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that filled the silent room. He garners the adoration of the civilians and the respect of the soldiers. From the shadows, another voice, smooth and cultured, replied, "He is an asset. He is a wildfire," the elder corrected without looking up. "His power is an anomaly we do not understand." And this personal philosophy he champions, this unyielding hope, is a dangerous ideology. It teaches people to look to a man, not the system, for their salvation. He finally lifted his gaze, his eyes cold and hard as diamonds. Keep a closer watch on Admiral Koryu. A man with the power to save the world also has the power to break it. On the table, the report lay open. Next to a grainy photograph of Naruto smiling broadly at a cheering crowd, a single line of text stood out, stamped in bold, red ink. Classification: Devil Fruit User. Name: Kitsune no Mi, Mythical Zone, Model, Kyuubi. Threat Level: Unpredictable. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. A Dinner and a Declaration. The steam rising from the bowl in front of Naruto was, in his opinion, the most beautiful sight in the world. It carried the rich, savory aroma of pork broth, fermented bamboo shoots, and perfectly roasted seaweed. The restaurant, Ichiraku Ramen, a name that had made Naruto's heart ache with a strange, phantom nostalgia when he'd first seen the sign, was a small, cozy establishment on a quiet, peaceful island a short jump from the war-torn Kajiro. It was a world away from the smoke and blood of a few hours prior. The gentle clinking of chopsticks and the low murmur of happy customers was the only soundtrack. Naruto, having shed his admiral's coat, sat between Hina and Tashigi at the polished wooden counter. He already had his chopsticks split and was staring at his steaming bowl of miso chashu ramen with the reverence of a pilgrim before a holy shrine. Tashigi, on the other hand, sat ramrod straight, her hands placed precisely on her lap. She was acutely aware of the social chasm between a marine captain and an admiral. Dining together was one thing, a casual, off-the-books meal at a noodle stand was another. It felt like a flagrant breach of 1,000 points of protocol. She kept expecting Fleet Admiral Akainu himself to burst through the door and court-martial them all on the spot. Hina was, as always, a picture of composure. She had also removed her coat, revealing the simple, dark dress shirt she wore underneath. She sipped her tea, her sharp eyes missing nothing, not the way Naruto's entire being seemed to radiate pure joy in the presence of ramen, nor the way Tashigi was wound tighter than a spring. Hina finds this place quaint, she commented, her voice a low, smooth melody. Quaint, it's heaven, Naruto declared, before plunging his face into his bowl and inhaling a massive mouthful of noodles. He came up for air a moment later, a blissful expression on his face and a bit of broth on his chin. Ah, that's the stuff, the perfect blend of salty and savory. You gotta try the broth. Tashigi watched, mortified and fascinated in equal measure. This was the Yellow Dragon. The man who had dismantled an entire pirate crew in minutes. He was eating like a starving wolf. Tentatively, she picked up her own chopsticks and took a delicate bite of her shio ramen. The flavor was surprisingly complex, light yet deeply satisfying. A small, involuntary sound of appreciation escaped her. Naruto grinned at her, a real, genuine grin that made his whisker marks crinkle. Good, right, a good bowl of ramen can solve anything. Bad day, ramen. Tough fight, ramen. Complicated paperwork that you really don't want to do. Ramen first, then maybe think about the paperwork later. Hina allowed a small smile to grace her lips. A simple philosophy, Admiral. It's Naruto, he corrected her gently, already halfway through his bowl. And yeah, maybe, but simple stuff is usually the most important. People forget that. He paused, looking at his bowl for a moment, a flicker of something distant in his eyes. Back home, a bowl of ramen was more than just food. It was a celebration, a way of saying, good job, or, I'm here for you. It connects people, you know. Tashigi looked up from her noodles. Back home, sir, I mean, Naruto-san. Where is that? Your file is heavily redacted. It just says you appeared in the West Blue 5 years ago. Naruto's expression didn't sadden, but it became thoughtful. He finished chewing a piece of chashu pork before answering. It's a long way from here. A different kind of place. He didn't elaborate, and the casual way he changed the subject made it clear that was all they were going to get. Speaking of important stuff, Captain Tashigi. Those swords you were looking for, you find any good ones lately? Tashigi blinked, caught completely off guard. How did you know I was looking for swords? I read your file, he said simply. As if it were the most obvious thing in the world. All my senior officers. It's important to know who you're fighting with. Your file says you want to find all 12 of the Supreme Grad Imato that have fallen into the hands of pirates and criminals. That's a pretty huge goal. It's awesome. The blush returned to Tashigi's neck with a vengeance. No one had ever called her lifelong ambition awesome. They called it naive, obsessive, or impossible. To have an admiral, one of the 3 strongest fighters in the entire world government, validate her dream with such simple, unadulterated enthusiasm left her speechless. I believe that such masterful creations should not be used for evil, she managed to say, her voice gaining strength as she spoke of her passion. They are works of art, imbued with the spirit of their creators. They deserve to be respected, not used to terrorize the innocent. Naruto nodded, listening intently. He wasn't just hearing her words, he was listening. So it's not about the power of the swords for you. It's about justice for the swords themselves. Exactly, she said, her eyes lighting up. You understand. Of course, he replied. It's the same reason I fight. There are things in this world worth protecting. People, swords, ideals, it's all the same, isn't it? Hina had been watching the exchange silently, her teacup paused halfway to her lips. She had seen Naruto's power, his tactical brilliance, and now she was seeing his emotional intelligence. He had, in the span of a few sentences, disarmed the famously rigid capta in Tashigi more effectively than any pirate ever could. Now, he turned those piercing blue eyes on her. What about you, Rear Admiral Hina? He asked, his tone shifting from friendly curiosity to genuine inquiry. Your file says you're one of the most efficient officers in the Grand Line. You close cases, you capture pirates, you never fail. But it doesn't say why. What's your justice? The question was direct, personal, and completely unexpected. Most officers, even fellow admirals, only cared about her results. They saw her as a beautiful, efficient tool of the world government. They never asked about her motivations. Hina placed her cup down with a soft click. Hina's justice is order, she said, her voice even. Chaos is the enemy. It is in chaos that the innocent suffer, that monsters like Baraku thrive. The world government provides the structure, the laws, the cage that contains the chaos. My duty is to reinforce that cage, to bind those who would break it. So you put them in cages, Naruto mused. But what happens then? Do you think they can change? The people you lock up. The question hung in the air. It was a challenge to the very foundation of her beliefs. The Marine doctrine was clear. Criminals were to be removed from society permanently. Rehabilitation was a footnote, not a priority. Hina believes that some are beyond redemption, she answered carefully. But Hina also believes in the system. The cage is not just a punishment, it is a chance for the world outside it to remain safe and orderly. I get that, Naruto said, surprising her. Order is important, but sometimes you have to break the cage to let the good people out, you know. He leaned forward, his elbows on the counter, his voice dropping slightly. When I showed up, I didn't know anything about this world. I didn't know about the world government, or the celestial dragons, or the warlords. All I saw were people who needed help and other people who were hurting them. So I helped. It's just that simple for me. I can't stand to see people crying. If I have the power to stop it, I have to. That's my justice, I guess. Unyielding hope. The hope that tomorrow can be better, and the will to fight for it. Silence fell over their corner of the ramen bar. Tashigi stared at him, her heart pounding. It was such a simple, yet profoundly powerful, philosophy. It cut through all the politics, all the bureaucracy, all the shades of gray she wrestled with daily. Hina found herself looking at the man, not the admiral. She saw a deep, unshakable conviction in his eyes, a clarity that was as brilliant and unwavering as the sun. It was intoxicating. It was dangerous. And she was drawn to it like a moth to a flame. The spell was broken by the frantic squawking of a den mush. From the pocket of Naruto's uniform jacket, draped over his stool. The snail had a grim, determined expression on its face, mimicking the collar. Naruto sighed, the easy-going man replaced in an instant by the decisive admiral. Yeah, he answered. The voice that came through was panicked and static-laced. Miral Koryu, it's an emergency. We've lost contact with the G8 fortress in the Grand Line. Total communications blackout. Naruto's posture straightened. The warmth in his eyes was replaced by a hard, focused light. G8. That's Vice Admiral Jonathan's base. They're one of the most secure fortresses we have. What happened? Quote, we don't know, sir. 1 minute we were getting standard reports, the next, just silence. No distress call, nothing. It's like they just vanished. Naruto stood up, throwing a handful of berry onto the counter that was more than enough to cover their meals. I'm on my way. He ended the call and turned to Hina and Tashigi. The change in his demeanor was jarring. The easy-going friend was gone, replaced by a commander. Sorry to cut this short, he said, his voice now crisp and authoritative. I have to go. He grabbed his admiral's coat, shrugging it on. As he turned to leave, he paused and looked back at them. The hard edge in his eyes softened for a moment. Thanks for the company. We should do this again sometime. When the world isn't, you know, falling apart. He offered them a small, tired smile before turning and walking out of the restaurant, a flash of white and orange disappearing into the night. Hina and Tashigi sat in silence for a long moment, the remnants of their dinner between them. The warmth of the restaurant suddenly felt a little colder without his presence. Tashigi finally broke the silence, her voice quiet. He's not what I expected. Hina picked up her teacup, her gaze fixed on the spot where he had been sitting. She took a slow, deliberate sip. She thought of his overwhelming power, his disarming grin, his simple love for ramen, and the unwavering fire of hope in his eyes. He was a contradiction, a force of nature with the heart of a kind man. An admiral who spoke not of absolute justice or unwavering order, but of hope. No, Hina said, a thoughtful, almost dangerous smile touching her lips. He is not what anyone expected. She looked at Tashigi, and in the younger woman's wide, earnest eyes, she saw the same mixture of awe, confusion, and undeniable fascination that she felt in her own chest. They didn't speak of it. They didn't have to. A silent declaration had been made over bowls of noodles and shared philosophies. The Maelstrom Admiral had swept into their lives, and they both knew, with a certainty that was as thrilling as it was terrifying, that nothing would ever be the same. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Unseen Enemy. The air in Marineford was different. It was heavy, saturated with the weight of absolute, unyielding power. The fortress island was a monument of stone and steel, its colossal walls and towering central citadel designed to inspire awe and intimidation in equal measure. It was the heart of the world government's military might, and it beat with a drum of unwavering, militant order. To Naruto, it felt suffocating. He preferred the open air and the chaotic, vibrant energy of the world he'd sworn to protect. He walked the massive hallways with a purposeful stride, his orange-lined admiral's coat a slash of brilliant, defiant color against the stark gray and blue of his surroundings. Marines of all ranks stopped and straightened as he passed, their salutes a mixture of reverence for his rank and genuine admiration for the legends that followed him. He returned their gestures with a nod and a small, easy smile, but his mind was elsewhere, replaying the fragmented report about G8. The Fleet Admiral's office was at the pinnacle of the central citadel, a chamber with a view of the entire fortress, the bay, and the distant sea. When Naruto entered, the two men already present didn't bother to turn. Fleet Admiral Sakazuki, formerly Akainu, stood with his back to the door, staring out the massive window, his broad shoulders rigid beneath his white and red uniform. The faint smell of sulfur and cigar smoke hung in the air around him. The other man, Admiral Borsellino, or Kizaru, was slouched in a chair, idly inspecting his fingernails, a lazy, unreadable smile on his face. You're late, Koryu, Sakazuki growled, his voice the low rumble of a volcano before an eruption. He didn't turn around. Got held up, Naruto said, his tone light but devoid of apology. He came to a stop in the center of the room. A pirate crew was throwing a party on a civilian island. Had to shut it down. I read the report, Sakazuki countered, finally turning. His face was a mask of grim severity, the shadows cast by the harsh office lighting deepening the lines of his permanent scowl. You dismantled an entire pirate fleet, but you let the captain, a man with a bounty of over 300 million berry, live. You accepted his surrender. That is not absolute justice. That is weakness. Naruto met his heated gaze without flinching. He gave up. He laid down his arms and surrendered his crew. Justice isn't about extermination, Fleet Admiral. It's about ending the threat. He's no longer a threat. He's in a cell in Impel Down. A cell he could one day escape from. Sakazuki shot back, taking a step forward. The temperature in the room seemed to rise. Evil is a disease. You don't imprison a plague. You burn it out, completely. From his chair, Kizaru let out a long, drawn-out syllable. Ooh, so scary. But the paperwork for mass executions is just tedious, don't you think? He spoke with the energy of a man who had just been roused from a very pleasant nap. Sakazuki ignored him. His focus was entirely on Naruto. The tension between them was an old, familiar thing. It was the clash of magma and maelstrom, of unbending law and unyielding hope. They were the two strongest pillars of the Marines, and they were pushing in opposite directions. Before Naruto could offer a retort, the doors to the office burst open. A high-ranking officer, his face pale and beaded with sweat, rushed in. Clutching a den mushi that was ominously silent. Fleet Admiral, he gasped, trying to catch his breath. It's G8, the Navarone base. Sakazuki's eyes narrowed. What about it? Has Jonathan finally gotten himself into trouble he can't talk his way out of? Sir, we don't know. The entire base has gone dark. All communications, visual and audio, were cut simultaneously 30 minutes ago. We've tried every frequency. There's just nothing. Silence. The room fell quiet. Even Kizaru lowered his hand, his lazy smile faltering for a fraction of a second. G8 wasn't just some remote outpost. It was a fortress, a strategic linchpin in the Grand Line, famous for its supposedly impenetrable defenses and the brilliant, unconventional mind of its commander, Vice Admiral Jonathan. For such a place to go silent without a single distress call was not just unlikely, it was impossible. It must be the revolutionaries, Sakazuki snarled, his fist clenching. Magma began to drip from his knuckles, sizzling as it hit the stone floor. A new weapon. They've finally made a significant move. Prepare the fleet. We will respond with overwhelming force. I want that fortress leveled. No, Naruto said, his voice cutting through the Fleet Admiral's rage. That's the stupidest thing you could possibly do. Sakazuki turned on him, his face contorted with fury. What did you say? You heard me, Naruto said, his easygoing demeanor completely gone, replaced by the sharp, decisive focus of a commander. You have no intelligence. You don't know what you're facing. You send a fleet in blind. You're just sending more of our people to their deaths. What if it's a weapon that gets stronger the more people you throw at it? What if it's a disease? You can't just burn everything you don't understand. And your solution, Sakazuki challenged, is it to offer it a chance to surrender? My solution is to go in smart, Naruto replied, his blue eyes like chips of ice. I'll go myself. A small, fast ship. I'll get in, assess the situation, and report back. A scalpel, not a sledgehammer. How brave, Kizaru drawled, polishing his glasses on his sleeve. Going all alone into the big, scary quiet place. You might not come back. Then you'll only have to deal with one. Soft, Admiral instead of two, Naruto shot back without looking at him. He kept his eyes locked on Sakazuki. Let me go. It's the best tactical choice. You know it is. Sakazuki stared at him, his jaw working silently. The logic was sound. As much as he despised Koryu's ideology, he couldn't deny his effectiveness. The man was an anomaly, a force of nature that defied all conventional military wisdom. And perhaps, just perhaps, this impossible situation required an impossible solution. Fine. The Fleet Admiral finally bit out, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. Go. Take your scalpel. But if you are not back with a full report in 12 hours, I am turning that entire sector of the sea into a volcanic wasteland. Understood. Crystal, Naruto said. He turned and walked out of the office without another word, leaving the two admirals in a heavy, simmering silence. The sea on the approach to Navarone was unnervingly placid. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. Naruto stood on the bow of his small, high-speed reconnaissance ship, the wind whipping through his hair. He'd made the journey in record time, pushing the ship's engines to their limit. He had his eyes closed, his hands clasped behind his back. He wasn't looking. he was feeling. He was in sage mode. The natural energy of the world flowed into him, granting him a sensory awareness that was beyond sight or sound. He could feel the life force of the fish swimming deep beneath the hull, the lazy circling of the gulls high overhead, the steady, rhythmic breathing of his small skeleton crew behind him. But as they drew closer to the coordinates of G8, he felt something else. Or rather, a lack of something. It was a hole, a void in the tapestry of natural energy. It was as if a patch of the world had simply been erased, leaving a pocket of absolute nothingness. The closer they got, the larger and more profound the void became. The natural energy around him felt muted, as if it were being absorbed or negated by an unseen presence. A cold knot of unease tightened in his stomach. This wasn't the work of a devil fruit. This was something else entirely. "Admiral, we have visual," the helmsman called out. Naruto opened his eyes. There it was, the fortress of Navarone, G8. It was a masterpiece of engineering. A circular base of sea stone and steel built around a captured whirlpool, making a naval assault nearly impossible. It was massive, imposing, and utterly pristine. The Rhine flags atop its battlements waved gently in the breeze. There were no plumes of smoke, no structural damage, no signs of a battle whatsoever. It looked perfectly normal, and that was the most terrifying part. "Bring us into the secondary docking bay," Naruto ordered, his voice low. No signals, no communications, total radio silence. The ship slipped into the cavernous bay like a ghost. The emergency lights were on, casting long, eerie shadows, but the bay was empty. The mooring stations were vacant, the cranes and supply lifts motionless. It was quiet, an unnatural, profound quiet that seemed to suck the sound from the air. The clang of the ship's ramp hitting the metal deck echoed with an obscene loudness. "Stay with the ship," Naruto told his crew. "Lock it down. If you don't hear from me in 1 hour, you leave. No arguments. That's a direct order." He stepped onto the deck alone, the sound of his own footsteps unnervingly loud in the oppressive silence. He walked into the fortress proper, his senses on high alert. The main corridor was empty. A cleaning cart was parked against a wall, a bucket of soapy water still full. He pushed open the door to the mess hall. The sight made the hair on his arms stand up. The hall was full of half-eaten meals. Trays of food sat on the tables, a thin layer of dust gathering on them. A cup of coffee had been knocked over, the dark stain still looking fresh. But there were no people. No bodies. No signs of a struggle. It was as if thousands of Marines had simply ceased to exist in the middle of their lunch. He moved through the fortress like a phantom, checking the barracks, the training grounds, the command center. It was the same everywhere. Reports were left half-written on desks. Laundry was still hanging on lines in the living quarters. In one room, a child's teddy bear lay on the floor, dropped mid-stride. The silence was a physical presence, pressing in on him, heavy and suffocating. There was no wind whistling through the corridors. No hum of the generators, no creak of metal. Nothing. In the central command center, Naruto stood before the main communication console. All the lights were green. All systems were operational. There was nothing physically wrong. He placed a hand on the console, closing his eyes and focusing, pushing his own energy, his chakra, into the machine. Nothing. He then focused outward, TTING Sage Mode expand to its absolute limit. He could feel the void now, a palpable aura of negation that clung to the entire fortress. It felt ancient, hungry, and utterly alien. It didn't just dampen natural energy, it erased it. It was a power that unmade things. A deep, primal instinct, the one that had kept him alive through countless battles in another lifetime, screamed at him. This was a place of death. But a death unlike any he had ever known. This wasn't a battlefield, it was a tomb where the bodies had been stolen. In the silent, candlelit chamber in Mariajoy, the elder the sword unfurled a map of the Grand Line. The other members of his secret cabal, their faces hidden by the deep shadows, watched him. "The anomaly at G8 has stabilized," the elder said, his voice a dry whisper. "The phenomenon is contained to the island and its immediate vicinity. For now." "And Admiral Koryu?" another voice asked, this one sharp and impatient. "He has entered the fortress." "Alone," the first elder replied. He placed a single black ghost stone on the map, right over the location of Navarone. We do not know the nature of this silence. But it is a power beyond our understanding. A power that can make one of the most fortified marine bases in the world vanish without a trace. A cruel smile touched his lips, a barely visible slash in the darkness. Let the dragon face the silence. Let us test the limits of this unyielding hope against a foe that offers nothing but oblivion. Whatever the outcome, we will have our answer. Either we will be rid of a troublesome variable, or we will learn the measure of a weapon we may yet need to control. He looked down at the black stone on the map, his eyes glinting in the candlelight. Let us see if our hero can find hope in a world without sound. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. Whispers in the Silence. Naruto stood on the deck of his ship as it cut through the calm waters away from Navarone, but the oppressive silence the fortress clung to him like a shroud. He had left the ghost base behind, the void at his back, but the feeling of it, that cold, hungry nothingness, was seared into his senses. When he'd reported his findings to Marineford, the response had been exactly what he'd expected. A power that erases things. Sakazuki's voice had crackled with scorn over the Den Den Mushi. Don't be a fool, Koryu. It is a trick, a complex illusion created by a devil fruit user. Your recommendation to quarantine the area is an act of cowardice. You failed to find the enemy, and so you wish to wall off your failure. There is no enemy there. Naruto had insisted, his voice tight with a frustration he struggled to contain. There's nothing. No bodies, no energy signatures, no signs of a fight. That's the point. Something didn't attack G8. Something unmade it. The argument had gone nowhere. The fleet admiral, a man who saw the world in terms of force and counterforce, could not comprehend a threat that simply wasn't there. He'd agreed to a temporary quarantine, but only to assemble a Buster Call fleet that would, in his words, sterilize the problem with fire and steel. Naruto knew that was the worst possible move. It was like trying to punch a hole in the ocean. He needed a different approach. He needed expertise that went beyond military strategy. He needed someone who understood the strange, forgotten corners of the world. Someone with an analytical mind that saw patterns where others saw only chaos. He needed Hina. He redirected his ship. Her fleet, he knew, was docked at the nearby marine supply base of Logatown. Resupplying after the battle at Kajuro. As his ship pulled into the harbor, cutting a sharp, professional line through the bustling port traffic, he saw her command vessel at once. It was immaculate, orderly, every rope coiled perfectly, every marine on deck standing at sharp attention. It was Hina to its core. He found her in the base's records room, a vast, dusty library of sea charts and historical logs. Tashigi was with her, meticulously cataloging the swords they had confiscated from Baraku's crew. The two of them made a striking pair. Hina, the picture of cool, dark elegance, moving with a deliberate grace. Tashigi, earnest and focused, her brow furrowed in concentration, a smudge of ink on her cheek. Hina, Naruto said, his voice making them both look up in surprise. He wasn't wearing his admiral's coat, and without it, he seemed younger, more approachable, but the gravity in his expression was undeniable. Admiral Koryu, Hina acknowledged, her head tilting in curiosity. Hina did not expect to see you again so soon. Your business at G8 must have concluded quickly. It's Naruto, he reminded her automatically. And it's not concluded, it's just started. He pulled up a stool, the legs scraping against the old wooden floor. He looked at both of them. I need your help. Both of you. He laid it all out for them, not the sanitized, formal report he'd given Sakazuki, but the raw, unsettling truth. He described the oppressive silence, the half-eaten meals, the feeling of a void in the world's natural energy. He spoke not as an admiral giving a briefing, but as a man confronting a mystery that defied everything he knew. Tashigi listened, her initial look of professional deference melting into one of horrified concern. They're all just gone. Thousands of them, and their families. Naruto nodded grimly. Vanished. Hina leaned against a towering shelf of charts, her arms crossed, her sharp eyes fixed on Naruto's face. She didn't interrupt, but he could see the gears turning in her mind. An enemy that leaves no trace of its existence or its methods, she mused when he finished. That is not a military unit. That is a force of nature. strategically. It is the perfect weapon. Hina is intrigued. I found one thing, Naruto said, leaning forward. It was almost nothing, but it wasn't the void. A faint energy trail, something ancient. I traced it. It leads to an uninhabited island about 50 kilometers northeast of G8's position. The old charts call it the Isle of Whispers. It's known for its prehistoric ruins. Most sailors think it's cursed. A curse. Quote. Tashigi murmured, her hand instinctively going to the hilt of her sword. Hina thinks. Curse is a word people use for things they do not understand, the Rear Admiral stated. We will go. Hina will lend you her expertise in ancient Grand Line history. And her cage. I'm coming too, Tashigi said immediately, her voice firm. It wasn't a request. If the Re's a chance to find out what happened to those Marines, I have to be there. Naruto looked between them, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. He hadn't needed to command them. He had asked, and they had come. Good, he said, because I have a feeling this isn't something I can just punch my way through. The Isle of Whispers lived up to its name. As their small scout ship approached, a strange quiet descended. It wasn't the absolute, soul-crushing void of G8, but a heavy, expectant hush. The sound of the waves breaking against the shore seemed muffled, the cries of the gulls distant and distorted. The island itself was a riot of untamed, dark green jungle, and rising from its center, like a broken tooth against the sky, was a massive, crumbling ziggurat of black stone. They disembarked onto a beach of gray sand, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. The place felt watchful, ancient. The architecture is from the pre-void century, Hina observed, running a gloved Han. Over a moss-covered stone near the jungle's edge. Possibly even older. This civilization vanished long before the world government was formed. They moved into the jungle, with Naruto taking the lead. His senses, amplified by Sage Mode, were a double-edged sword here. He could feel the life in the jungle, the insects, the lizards, the deep-rooted trees, but it all felt muted, as if they were moving through a world with the volume turned down. They found the entrance to the ziggurat at the base of a wide, stone staircase that was half swallowed by the jungle. The opening was a perfect, dark square, seeming to inhale the light. As they stepped inside, the temperature dropped. The air was stale, untouched by the outside world for millennia. The walls of the first corridor were covered in intricate carvings, weathered by time but still visible in the beams of their flashlights. They depicted a tall, featureless figure standing over a sea of kneeling people. The people had no faces. They were smooth, blank ovals. What do you make of this? Naruto asked, tracing one of the carvings. Hina shone her light on a section of eroded script running beneath the images. The dialect is archaic, a precursor to the language found on the poneglyphs. She squinted, her linguistic expertise kicking in. It speaks of a king. A silent king. He was not a conqueror. He was a shepherd. He offered his people the great peace. A gift of serene oblivion. Serene oblivion, Tashigi said, a shiver running down her spine. That sounds horrible. To them, it was salvation, Hina corrected, her voice low. He consumed their noise, their painful presence, and granted them unity in the beautiful silence. Her light moved to another panel. It showed the same faceless people merging into the tall, featureless figure of the king. It says the king is drawn to loud souls, great resonances that disturb the quiet of the world. A cold feeling, unrelated to the tomb's chill, washed over Naruto. A great resonance, a loud soul. They pressed deeper, the corridor opening into a vast central chamber. The ceiling was lost in the oppressive darkness above them. And then, they were not alone. They emerged from the stone walls themselves, flowing like mercury into a semi-solid form. They were vaguely humanoid, but their bodies were made of a shifting, soundless gray energy. They had no faces, no features. Just a shimmering distortion where a person should be. They moved without a sound, gliding over the stone floor, and there were dozens of them. What are they? Tashigi gasped, drawing Shiger. The ring of steel against the scabbard was shockingly loud. Guardians, Hina stated, her arms already crossed in front of her, ready to act. Naruto didn't waste time on questions. He formed a Rasengan in his palm and surged forward. The instant he entered the chamber, he felt it the same muting effect from Navarone, but weaker, less concentrated. His Rasengan, usually a vibrant, roaring sphere, seemed to shrink slightly, its hum dampened. He slammed it into the chest of the nearest creature. The impact was wrong. Instead of the usual explosive force, it was like punching deep into a thick, cold mud. The creature's form distorted, absorbing a portion of the energy, before the rest of it blasted it apart. It dissipated into a silent, gray mist, but another one was already gliding towards him. My attacks are being suppressed, he yelled, dodging a silent swipe from a creature's energy limb. Raw power isn't as effective here. Tashigi was already in motion. Her blade was a silver blur. Shigur, she cried, and a flurry of precise, lightning-fast strikes sliced through one of the creatures. Unlike Naruto's Rasengan, her physical blade passed cleanly through, and the creature dissolved. Cutting them works. Then let's give them something to cut. Hina called out. Awase Bowery. Black, cage-like bars shot from her arms, attempting to encircle a group of the silent guardians. But the creatures' forms wavered, and the bars passed straight through them as if they were ghosts. Hina's eyes narrowed in frustration. Hina's cage is ineffective. Then change the cage, Naruto yelled, parrying a blow with his forearm. He had to rely on pure taijutsu, his body a whirlwind of kicks and blocks. He was fast, much faster than them, but they were relentless and their silent attacks were disorienting. They're not solid. Try to bind their energy, not their bodies. It was a tactical nightmare that forced them into a new rhythm. Naruto, with his blinding speed and shadow clones, became the ultimate distraction, drawing the attention of the horde, his clones engaging them in a chaotic, silent brawl. Tashigi became the executioner, her blade flashing in the darkness, precisely dismantling the creatures that Naruto's clones herded towards her. Hina, adapting instantly to Naruto's advice, changed her tactics. Instead of creating wide, simple cages, she began weaving her black bars into a dense, complex lattice, a net of energy so fine it was almost solid. Koshi Koshi no mi, Ori Ori no mai. The net swept through the chamber, and this time, it worked. The silent creatures were caught. Their energetic forms snagged and held fast by the properties of her devil fruit. Now, Tashigi, Hina commanded. Tashigi didn't need to be told twice. She darted through the immobilized enemies, her sword a graceful, deadly arc. They fought as one seamless unit, their individual strengths covering the other's weaknesses. There was no grandstanding, no wasted motion. It was the desperate, efficient synergy of true professionals. In the silent chaos, watching Hina's strategic mind adapt and Tashigi's unwavering courage, Naruto felt a profound sense of respect, a bond being forged not in conversation, but in the crucible of a shared fight for survival. When the last creature dissolved into mist, the chamber fell silent once more. Panting, they stood back to back in the center of the room, their flashlight beams cutting through the gloom. Everyone okay? Naruto asked, his voice echoing slightly. Hina is fine, the rear admiral replied, though her breathing was heavier than usual. I'm all right, Tashigi said, her knuckles white where she gripped her sword. Their lights fell upon the far wall of the chamber. It was dominated by a single, massive carving, much more preserved than the others. It depicted the silent king again, but this time he was looking up at the sky, and from the sky, a brilliant, stylized sun was descending. Hina stepped forward, light tracing the final line of script at the bottom of the mural. Her breath hitched. What is it? Naruto asked, moving to her side. She read the words aloud, her voice barely a whisper, the Ansi. Ent syllables sounding alien and heavy in the dead air. The king sleeps in the heart of the quiet world, but the roar of a golden sun shall be the bell that wakes him. The words hung in the darkness. Tashigi looked at Naruto, her eyes wide with dawning comprehension. Hina slowly turned her head, her gaze locking with his. The roar of a golden sun. Naruto's mind flashed back to the duel with the warlord. The brilliant, overwhelming power of his sage mode, the massive energy he had unleashed, an energy so potent it had probably rippled across the Grand Line. An energy that would, to an ancient, slumbering entity, feel exactly like the roar of a sun. It wasn't a random event. It wasn't a curse. It was a consequence. He had led it here. He had woken it up. The silence that had consumed thousands of lives at G8. He had been the one to ring the dinner bell. The weight of that realization crashed down on him, heavier than any physical blow. He was not just their salvation. He was the catastrophe. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. A challenge from a rival. The weight of their discovery on the Isle of Whispers was a suffocating presence on the small ship, more tangible than the sea spray. Naruto stood at the railing, staring at the horizon, the ancient words echoing in his mind. The roar of a golden sun shall be the bell that wakes him. It was no longer just a mission to uncover a mystery. It was a penance, a burden he had unknowingly placed upon the world. Tashigi was practicing her sword forms on the aft deck, her movements sharp and precise, but her brow was knitted with a woe. That had nothing to do with her technique. Hina was in the ship's small comms room, drafting a heavily encrypted report for a few trusted allies within the Marines, carefully omitting any mention of Naruto's direct culpability. They were all processing the revelation in their own way, the unspoken tension a low hum beneath the engines. It was this hum that was first interrupted. A deep, resonant, thrumming sound vibrated through the hull, a bass note so low it was felt more than heard. "Admiral," the helmsman shouted from the bridge. "We have a vessel approaching. Fast. It's massive." Naruto was already moving. He joined the helmsman, peering through the forward viewport. What he saw made him narrow his eyes. It was a single, colossal ship, but it was unlike any pirate or marine vessel he had ever seen. Its hull was plated in what looked like pure, polished gold, gleaming ostentatiously in the afternoon sun. It had no sails, no visible propulsion, yet it cut through the water with terrifying speed. Its gilded prow throwing up a wave that could capsize a smaller ship. It wasn't just a ship, it was a statement. A declaration of obscene wealth and power. "Identify them," Naruto ordered, his voice calm and steady. "No flag, sir. No identifying marks, except, my God, is that a solid gold figurehead?" The golden ship didn't fire. It didn't maneuver for an attack. It simply moved to block their path, its immense bulk forcing them to a dead stop. A figure appeared on the forecastle of the gilded vessel, standing alone. He was a mountain of a man, dressed in a simple, pen black vest that did little to hide a physique carved from granite. His arms were covered in intricate golden tattoos that seemed to shimmer with their own light, and his hands, clenched into fists at his sides, looked as if they were cast from the same metal as his ship. A voice, amplified by what must have been a powerful devil fruit or advanced technology, boomed across the water. It was a voice accustomed to command, dripping with arrogance and absolute self-assurance. "Admiral Koryu, the Yellow Dragon of the Marines. I have been searching for you." Tashigi and Hina had joined Naruto on the bridge. "Who is that?" Tashigi asked, her hand on Shiger. Hina's eyes were narrowed in recognition. "Gideon Rourke, known as the Gilded Fist. One of the 7 warlords of the sea. His power is said to be absolute physical might, backed by a fortune large enough to buy a kingdom. Hina finds his taste. Gotti. Rourke," Naruto called back, his own voice carrying easily across the water. "Your title is Warlord of the Sea, not traffic cop. Get your shiny boat out of my way. I'm on official business." A deep, rumbling laugh was the only answer. "Official business? I've heard of your business, Admiral. They say you are a force of nature. They say your justice is a beacon of hope. I say it is a sham." Rourke pointed a massive, golden tattooed finger at Naruto. "The world government is a corrupt, bloated beast, and its admirals are merely its pampered pets on a leash. Your strength is borrowed, your title a gift. It is not earned." "I'm not really in the mood for a lecture on political philosophy," Naruto replied, his patience wearing thin. "State your purpose or move." "My purpose is you, Admiral," Rourke declared. "I wish to test this legend of yours against my own power. The pure, unadulterated strength of a man who forged his own empire from nothing. I challenge you to a duel. Here and now." The words hung in the air, a gauntlet thrown down on the open sea. "Do not accept," Hina warned, her voice low and urgent. "He is trying to bait you. Engaging a warlord without express orders is a political catastrophe. But if I refuse, he'll see it as weakness," Naruto countered, his eyes never leaving Rourke. "A man like that won't just turn around and leave. He'll attack, and I won't have the two of you caught in the crossfire." This was the dilemma. To fight was to break the rules. To play a pirate's game. To refuse was to endanger the people he was with. Rourke seemed to sense his hesitation. Let us make it interesting. He boomed. A wager, to prove I am a man of my word. We fight on that barren island to the east. 1-on-1. If you win, my title as warlord is forfeit. I will surrender myself and my entire crew to your custody, without resistance. My ship, my treasure, it is all yours. Tashigi gasped. For a warlord to wager his own title was unheard of. And if I win, Rourke's voice dropped, a predatory gleam in his eye, your ship, your crew, and your life belong to me. I will break the government's pet and prove that true power answers to no one. Naruto looked at Hina's stern, warning face. He looked at Tashigi's worried one. Then he looked back at the arrogant warlord. This wasn't about politics anymore. It was about responsibility. Rourke was a threat, a rogue element in the already broken system he despised. And more than that, Naruto felt a surge of cold anger at the man's dismissive arrogance. He had no idea the weight Naruto was carrying, the silent catastrophe he was trying to prevent. Fine, Naruto called out, his voice sharp and clear. I accept your challenge. Quote, the island was little more than a jagged rock jutting out of the sea, its surface flat and cracked like a dry riverbed. Naruto leapt from his ship to the shore, landing lightly on the dark stone. Rourke made a much more dramatic entrance, jumping from his golden vessel and landing with a ground-shaking impact that sent fracture spider webbing out from his boots. Just you and me, Naruto said, rolling his shoulders and cracking his neck. No tricks, no outside help. Tricks are the tools of the weak, Rourke sneered. I need only my fists. He slammed them together, and a shockwave of pure concussive force erupted from the impact, kicking up a cloud of dust and pebbles. Let us begin. Rourke charged. For a man his size, he moved with impossible speed. He didn't just run. He exploded across the stone plain. Naruto stood his ground, his body tensing. Rourke threw a punch, his fist glowing with a faint golden light. It was armament hockey, thick and potent, an armor of sheer willpower. Naruto didn't try to block. He sidestepped, the punch whistling past his ear with the force of a cannonball, shattering the rock face behind him. He spun, aiming a kick at Rourke's ribs. It was like kicking a wall of solid steel. The warlord grunted, but didn't budge. He swung a backhand, forcing Naruto to disengage. Fast, Rourke admitted, a wolfish grin spreading across his face. But your attacks are soft. You cannot harm me. From the deck of the marine ship, Hina and Tashigi watched through high-powered binoculars, their knuckles white. Rourke's hockey is legendary, Hina stated. Her voice tight. It is said to be an impenetrable defense. Naruto-kun cannot win a battle of attrition. Naruto seemed to come to the same conclusion. Brute force wasn't working. He needed to be smarter. Faster. More unpredictable. He brought his hands together in the familiar cross-shaped seal. In an instant, a dozen shadow clones puffed into existence, surrounding the warlord. Rourke laughed. More of your parlor tricks. Do you think numbers will save you? The clones charged. Rourke became a whirlwind of destruction, his golden fists shattering clones with every blow. Each impact was like a small explosion. But the clones weren't just attacking. They were a feint, a complex, multi-directional distraction. While Rourke was occupied with the clones to his front, the real Naruto was behind him. A Rasengan already formed in his hand. He thrust it forward, aiming for the center of Rourke's back. The warlord, sensing the attack at the last second, spun with incredible speed. Catching the Rasengan not on his fist, but on his open palm. The swirling sphere of chakra ground against his hockey-infused hand, a screaming vortex of power held at bay by sheer force of will. Rourke roared, his muscles bulging, and with a final push, he dispersed the Rasengan, the backlash throwing Naruto backward. A clever attack, Rourke panted, his hand smoking slightly. But still not enough. He stomped his foot, and the very ground rippled. My will is absolute. My body is unbreakable. Naruto landed on his feet, skidding to a halt. He was breathing a little harder now. The man was a monster. His hockey was stronger than anyone he had ever faced. Normal attacks, even the Rasengan, were being blunted. He needed more. He needed to tap into that other power. The power he now knew had a terrible cost. He stood still, closing his eyes. Forgive me, he whispered to the world, to the thousands of souls lost at G8. But I have to end this. He drew in a breath, and the very atmosphere of the island shifted. The air grew thick, heavy, humming with a power that was both ancient and alive. Energy, visible to the naked eye, began to flow towards him, drawn from the sky, the sea. The very rock beneath his feet. On the ship, Tashigi gasped. What is that? Natural energy, Hina breathed, her eyes wide with disbelief. He's drawing power from the world itself. When Naruto opened his eyes, they were different. His pupils had become horizontal bars, like a toad's, and orange pigmentation now surrounded his eyes, a mark of the perfect sage. He had become one with nature, and its power flowed through him. He looked up at Rourke, and the sheer pressure that radiated from him made the mighty warlord take an involuntary step back. This was the roar of a golden sun. What is this power? Rourke demanded, his arrogance finally cracking, replaced by a flicker of genuine fear. This, Naruto said, his voice now layered, echoing with the power of the natural world, is the end of this fight. He vanished. He moved so fast he left a vacuum in his wake. He appeared in front of Rourke, his fist cocked back. The warlord reacted on pure instinct, throwing up his arms in a defensive block. His haki flaring to its absolute maximum. Naruto's punch connected. It wasn't loud. It was a dull, sickening thud. But the force behind it was biblical. Rourke's, impenetrable, haki shattered like glass. The shockwave traveled through his arms and into his chest, lifting the giant of a man off his feet and sending him flying across the island. He crashed through a rock formation and finally slammed into the far cliff face with enough force to crack the entire structure. He slid to the ground, unconscious before he even landed, his golden tattoos dull, his aura of invincibility utterly broken. The island fell silent, save for the whistling of the wind. Naruto stood over his defeated opponent, the sage markings fading from his face. The immense power receded, leaving him feeling drained. And colder than before. He had won. He had upheld his end of the bargain. But as the rush of battle faded, he felt it. On the very edge of his enhanced senses, far beyond the horizon, a pinprick of wrongness. A void. It was stirring, growing, awakened from its slumber by the roar he had just unleashed. The bell had been rung, loud and clear. He looked at the unconscious form of Gideon Rourke. With a sigh, he bent down, not to deliver a final blow, but to hoist the heavy man over his shoulder. He would honor the deal. He would bring him to justice. His brand of justice, mercy and responsibility, hand in hand. He carried the defeated warlord back towards the ship, the weight on his shoulder nothing compared to the new, terrifying weight that had settled upon his soul. He had proven his strength. But in doing so, he had just invited a far greater darkness into the world. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The King's Awakening. The surrender of Gideon Rourke and his G.I.L.D. fleet was a logistical and political tempest. Hina, with her characteristic efficiency, took charge, her den mushi buzzing with clipped, authoritative commands as she coordinated the disarming of a warlord's crew, a process for which no standard manual existed. Tashigi, meanwhile, was in a swordsman's paradise, her eyes wide with a mixture of reverence and righteous fury as she catalogued the trove of legendary blades Rourke had hoarded in his personal armory. Naruto, however, was deaf to the commotion. He stood alone on the stern of his ship, facing back the way they had come, his senses stretched to their absolute limit. He was a sentinel watching for a storm he knew he had summoned. The pinprick of wrongness he'd felt after the duel was no longer a pinprick. It was a tear, a rip in the fabric of the world that was slowly, silently widening. He could feel the void of Navarone, no longer contained, beginning to swell like a drop of ink on wet paper. His personal den mushi, a small snail with an orange shell he'd painted himself, began to ring, its cry sharp and frantic. It was a priority channel from Marine headquarters. He answered it, his voice grim. Koryu, Admiral. The voice on the other end was young, panicked, and stretched thin by static. We have a code red situation in the Azure Ring Archipelago. The islands of Serafina, Porto Casa, and Oakhaven have all gone dark. In sequence, one after the other, Naruto's blood ran cold. The Azure Ring was a thriving, populous chain of islands, a jewel of the Grand Line. Define, dark, he commanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. Total communications blackout, sir. Same as G8. We had a patrol ship near Serafina when it happened. Their last transmission it was garbled, sir. The operator was screaming. He said the sound was gone. He said the sea had stopped making noise before they were cut off. Naruto closed his eyes. It was happening. Faster than he could have ever imagined. The king was awake, and it was hungry. Admiral Koryu, Hina said, appearing at his side. Her face was a mask of professional calm, but her eyes betrayed a deep-seated alarm. Hina has been monitoring the regional comms. 3 major civilian centers have ceased transmission in the last 20 minutes. The phenomenon is spreading. He looked at her, the guilt in his eyes so profound it was a physical presence. It's my fault, Hina. The energy I used in the fight. I woke it up. Hina's gaze didn't waver. There was no judgment in it, only a stark, analytical clarity. Assigning blame is a luxury we do not have. What is the tactical decision? He looked past her, at Tashigi, who was now directing Marines to secure Rourke's gilded ship. He saw the faces of his own crew, loyal and trusting. His justice was unyielding hope. He couldn't wallow in guilt while thousands of lives were being snuffed out like candle flames. He had to be the man they believed him to be. Rourke's ship, he said, the old, decisive spark returning to his voice. It's faster than anything we have. We're commandeering it. Plot a course for the center of the Azure Ring. Now, we're going straight into the heart of it. That is a tactically unsound decision, Hina stated, though she was already turning to relay the orders. We would be entering an unknown kill zone without backup. It's not a kill zone, Naruto countered, his voice raw. It's a dinner plate, and I'm what it's hungry for. If I go to it, maybe I can draw its attention away from the other islands. He looked out at the sea, his jaw set like stone. I rang the bell. I have to be the one to unring it. The gilded fist, for all its gaudy trappings, was a marvel of engineering. It tore through the sea, a golden arrow aimed at the heart of an encroaching apocalypse. The journey was tense and eerily quiet. The regional marine channels, usually a chaotic symphony of reports and chatter, were falling silent one by one as the phenomenon spread. They were sailing into a spreading dead zone on the map. As they entered the waters of the archipelago, the change became palpable. The sea grew placid, its surface like black glass. The wind died. The endless, comforting noise of the ocean, the crash of waves, the cry of gulls, the creak of the ship, faded away, leaving an unnerving, profound hush. It was the silence of a tomb. We're here, Tashigi whispered, her voice sounding unnaturally loud on the silent bridge. Through the viewport, they could see it. In the center of the ring of islands, the very air and sea seemed to be distorted. As if they were looking at the world through a warped lens. And in the middle of that distortion, a figure stood upon the surface of the unnaturally calm water. It was tall and slender, its form vaguely humanoid but indistinct. As if it were woven from shadow and negation. It had no face, no features, just a smooth, dark expanse where a head should be. It wore what looked like a long, tattered cloak that did not stir in the non-existent wind. It wasn't menacing. It wasn't grand. It was simply there. An absolute presence that was defined by its absolute absence of qualities. This was the Silent King. All ships, halt. Naruto's voice boomed from the ship's external address system, shattering the oppressive quiet. All personnel, prepare for battle, but do not engage unless I give the order. He didn't wait for an answer. He leapt from the railing of the golden ship, landing lightly on the glassy surface of the water, his chakra holding him steady. He walked across the sea, closing the distance between himself and the silent monarch, until only 100 meters of still water separated them. The king did not move. It did not speak. It simply regarded him, and Naruto felt its ancient, alien consciousness brush against his own. There was no malice, no anger. There was only a sense of profound, cosmic tidiness. The king saw the vibrant, chaotic, noisy energy of life, of Naruto, as a stain. An impurity that needed to be cleaned. I am the one you want, Naruto called out, his voice echoing over the silent sea. The golden sun, leave these islands, leave these people, your fight is with me. For the first time, the king moved. It raised a long, slender arm, pointing a featureless hand not at Naruto, but at the marine fleet behind him. From the bridge, Hina saw it happen. "Fire!" she commanded. "All cannons, full volley." The cannons of the fleet roared to life, a sudden, violent eruption of sound and fury. 100 cannonballs screamed across the water towards the king. They never reached him. Halfway there, they simply stopped. They hung in the air for a second, their momentum erased, before dropping into the sea with a series of silent splashes. The king's silent, passive aura of negation was now an active, directed force. A wave of invisible energy washed over the fleet. On the deck of Hina's ship, Marines suddenly stumbled, their rifles feeling impossibly heavy. The will to fight, the fire of their spirits, was being leached away, leaving behind a cold, listless apathy. "Hina cannot," Hina gasped, clutching her head. Her devil fruit, her power to create cages, was gone. The connection was severed, leaving her feeling hollow and powerless. "Stand firm," Tashigi yelled, drawing Shiger, her own spirit a sharp, defiant point against the wave of despair. "Do not give in." Naruto saw it all. He saw his soldiers faltering, Hina struggling, Tashigi standing as a lone bastion of defiance. The king was ignoring him, dismissing him, and targeting the noise of his followers. A burning, protective rage erupted in Naruto's chest, a force more potent than any sage energy. He entered sage mode in an instant, the orange markings flaring around his eyes, and charged. Get away from them. He was a blur of gold and white, crossing the water in a heartbeat. He formed a Rasengan, pouring all the natural energy he could muster into it, and slammed it into the king's chest. The impact was utterly, horrifyingly wrong. The Rasengan didn't explode, it was absorbed. It sank into the king's shadowy form like a stone into a black tar pit and vanished without a trace. The king didn't even flinch. It simply turned its faceless head to look down at him, and Naruto felt the sage energy being violently pulled out of him, siphoned away into the king's bottomless void. He leapt back, severing the connection, his body trembling from the strain. This thing didn't just mute power. It ate it. He was out of options. His strongest attacks were useless. His very energy was a food source. He looked back at his fleet, at Hina and Tashigi, and knew he had one last, terrible card to play. It was a gamble that could make everything worse, but it was the only one he had. Kurama, he thought, reaching deep inside himself to that familiar, ancient well of violent, red chakra. I need you, all of it. A voice, deep and rumbling as an earthquake, answered in his mind. It is a foolish risk. Kit, this thing is a predator of energy. Giving it a taste of mine might be like ringing a bell for a god. It's that or watch everyone I care about be erased. There was a pause, and then a deep, rumbling sigh. Very well, let us show this silent ghost what true noise sounds like. The world exploded in a torrent of vermilion energy. A colossal wave of raw, life-filled, furious chakra erupted from Naruto, so potent and violent it boiled the sea around him into steam. The oppressive silence was shattered by a visceral, psychic roar of pure power. A skeletal framework of red energy formed around him, followed by muscle, sinew, and then the unmistakable form of a fox with 9 lashing tails. The Kurama chakra mode. The silent king actually recoiled, taking a step back for the first time. The sheer, untamed life of the Biju's chakra was anathema to it, an agonizing scream in its silent world. Now, Naruto, Kurama roared in his mind. Before it can adapt, Naruto, encased in the fiery gold of his new form, brought his hands together. Black and red energy condensed in front of the chakra fox's mouth, a sphere of pure, destructive power. A tailed beast bomb. He poured everything into it, his will, his hope, his desperation, and Kurama's rage. He didn't just fire it. He thrust it forward, encasing it in a spiraling shuriken of wind. Tailed beast bomb Rasenshuriken. The attack tore across the water, not just a physical projectile but a tidal wave of sound, life, and energy. It was everything the Silent King was not. The king raised both its arms, its shadowy form condensing, becoming a point of absolute void to meet the storm. The Rasenshuriken hit. There was no explosion. There was a sound, but it wasn't a sound for the ears. It was a sound that resonated in the soul, a deafening shriek of conflicting realities, of something and nothing crashing together with unimaginable force. Light and shadow battled, a sphere of golden, life-giving rage. against a vortex of soul-consuming silence. For a moment, they were locked in a stalemate. Then, with a final, desperate roar from Naruto, the Rasenshuriken's power overwhelmed the void. It washed over the silent king. And the entity's form, for the first time, flickered. It distorted, coming apart at the seams like a poorly woven tapestry. Then, as quickly as it began, it was over. The king did not die. It did not explode. It simply retreated. Its form dissolved into the air, its presence vanishing from the world, fleeing the intolerable noise. The Kurama chakra mode dissipated, leaving Naruto floating on the water. His breath coming in ragged gasps. He was drained, his body screaming in protest, the chakra an echo in his veins. The oppressive silence was gone, replaced by the natural, beautiful sounds of the sea. But the victory was hollow. He looked around. The Azure Ring archipelago was still there, physically intact. But his sage senses told him the horrifying truth. The islands were empty. The life force of every man, woman, and child was gone. Erased. He had driven the king away. But he had been too late. Far too late. He had saved his fleet, but he had lost a world. He fell to his knees on the surface of the water, the weight of a million silent screams crashing down upon him. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. Aftermath and Confessions. The journey back from the Azure Ring was a silent, solemn procession. The Gilded Fist, a vessel built for celebrating obscene wealth and power, felt like a funeral barge. Its gleaming golden hull reflected a gray, unforgiving sea, and the crew, a mixture of Naruto's own men. Hina's disciplined soldiers, and Gideon Rourke's now leaderless pirates, moved about their duties with the hushed reverence of mourners. There was no celebration of survival, no relief from the bottle's end. Every person on board knew they were sailing away from a mass grave, a place where a million souls had been extinguished without a whisper. Naruto stood on the bridge, a solitary figure staring out at the endless water. The vibrant, golden aura of his Kurama chakra mode was gone, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness that seemed to have settled into his very soul. He hadn't spoken a word since the king had vanished. His usual warmth, the brilliant, sunlight charisma that drew people to him, had been completely extinguished, replaced by a cold, desolate emptiness that was more unnerving than any rage. Hina watched him from across the bridge, her arms crossed, her expression a carefully constructed mask of neutrality. She and Tashigi had tried to approach him. But the wall around him was absolute. He wasn't pushing them away, he simply wasn't there. He was adrift in a silent sea of his own guilt. Tashigi stood nearby, polishing the blade of Shigur with a methodical, almost frantic energy. It was the only thing she could focus on. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the faceless form of the king, felt that soul-leeching despair. And she saw the raw, agonizing power Naruto had unleashed, a power that had saved them, but had cost him a piece of himself. She looked at his back, at the proud admiral's coat that now seemed to hang on him like a lead weight. And her heart ached with a feeling she couldn't yet name. It was a fierce, protective instinct, a desperate need to see him smile again. They docked at a secure, remote marine outpost, far from any prying eyes. The moment the ramp was down and the ship was secured, Naruto took 2 steps onto the pier and his legs buckled. His body had finally surrendered to the brutal toll of the fight. He collapsed, not with a cry of pain, but with the silent, heavy fall of a statue. Before he even hit the ground, Tashigi was there, dropping her sword and catching him, her slight frame straining under his dead weight. Hina was a half-second behind her, her composure finally breaking as she rushed to his side. Together, they carried him to the Base's infirmary, the great yellow dragon of the Marines, the hero of Kujiro. Utterly spent, he awoke to the low hum of medical equipment and the clean, antiseptic smell of sterile bandages. He was in a private room, the lights dimmed. He felt weak, his limbs heavy. His chakra coils scraped raw and empty. He pushed himself up, his head swimming, and saw Tashigi asleep in a chair by his bedside. Her head was slumped to one side, her glasses were askew. And her hand was resting on the hilt of her katana, which leaned against the chair. Even in sleep, she was a guardian. He looked at her, at the genuine, unguarded concern etched on her face. And the wall of guilt inside him cracked, just a little. He had saved her. He had saved Hina. He had saved the crews. He clung to that single, Small fact like a drowning man to a piece of driftwood. As if sensing his gaze, Tashigi stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, and when they focused on him, a wave of relief washed over her features. She straightened up, pushing her glasses back into place, a faint blush on her cheeks. "Admiral, you're awake," she said, her voice soft. "The doctors said you just needed rest. Chakra exhaustion, they called it." "Naruto," he corrected her, his own voice hoarse, a ghost of his usual tone. "How long was I out?" "About 18 hours, she replied, her gaze dropping to her hands, which were now fidgeting in her lap. We were all worried." She took a deep breath, as if steeling herself. When she looked up again, the earnestness in her eyes was so intense it was almost painful. "Naruto-san, what you did back there, fighting that thing. It was the bravest thing I have ever seen." Naruto just shook his head, a bitter, humorless smile touching his lips. "Brave. I was too late, Tashigi. I failed. A million people are gone because I wasn't strong enough, or fast enough." "Don't," she said, her voice suddenly sharp, cutting through his self-recrimination. "Don't you dare say that." She stood up and walked to the edge of his bed, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You stood against something that wasn't even of this world. You faced it alone. That power you used, it was terrifying, yes. But it was also filled with so much life. It was the only thing in the universe that could make that monster retreat. You saved us. All of us. Don't cheapen our survival by calling it a mistake." He stared at her, taken aback by her ferocity. This was not the flustered, by-the-book captain he had met. This was a woman of fierce conviction, her sense of justice as sharp and unbending as her own blade. "My whole life," she continued, her voice softer now, but no less intense. "I've chased after the ideals of great swordsmen, of great heroes. I've always felt like I was living in their shadow. But when I saw you fight, you weren't fighting for a title, or for glory. You were fighting for us. You showed me what a true hero is. Your strength, it gives me hope." She had turned his own philosophy back on him, wielding it like a shield against his despair. Before he could respond, the door slid open and Hina entered, carrying a tray with a teapot and 2 cups. Her movements were as precise and graceful as ever, but Naruto could see the faint, dark circles under her eyes. She hadn't been resting either. She stopped when she saw he was awake, her gaze taking in the emotionally charged scene. A flicker of something unreadable passed through her eyes before her mask of cool professionalism settled back into place. "It is good to see you conscious, Admiral," she said, setting the tray down. "Hina has brought you some tea." "Hina," Tashigi said, a little flustered. "I was just." "Hina knows," the Rear Admiral said, her voice gentle. She poured a cup of tea and handed it to Naruto. Her fingers brushed against his, and brief contact sent a jolt of warmth through his exhausted body. He looked up at her, and in her dark, intelligent eyes, he saw the same deep-seated concern that he'd seen in Tashigi's. "Thank you," he murmured, taking the cup. Hina stood beside Tashigi, a silent, unified front. "Tashigi-chan is correct," she stated, her focus entirely on Naruto. "What you are feeling is guilt. It is an understandable, if inefficient, emotion. But it is misplaced." "How can you say that?" Naruto asked, his voice cracking. "Hina, you of all people, you believe in order. In cause and effect. The cause was me. The effect was the king waking up. Those people are gone because of my fight with Rourke. That's a simple, undeniable fact." "No," Hina countered, her voice losing its detached, analytical tone and gaining a surprising warmth. "The cause was a monster that has slept beneath the sea for millennia. You did not create it. You only had the misfortune of waking it. And then you had the courage to face it when no one else could." She took a small step closer, her composure finally beginning to fray at the edges. "When that thing turned its attention on our fleet, Hina was useless. My powers were gone. My strategies were meaningless. All Hina could do was watch as her soldiers began to lose the will to even stand." Her voice dropped to a near whisper. Hina is not accustomed to fear. But in that moment, Hina was afraid. Not for the mission. Not for her crew. Hina was terrified of losing you. The confession hung in the air, a stunningly vulnerable admission from the most self-possessed woman Naruto had ever met. He looked from her to Tashigi, from the brilliant strategist who had confessed her fear to the earnest swordswoman who had confessed her hope. They weren't just his subordinates. They weren't just his friends. They were his anchors in the storm of his own despair. He set the teacup down, his hand trembling slightly. "I was scared too," he admitted, the words feeling heavy and foreign on his tongue. He had always projected an aura of absolute confidence, of unshakable will. To admit fear was to admit he was breakable. "When my Rasengan did nothing, when it started to drain my sage energy, I thought it was over. All I could think about was getting it away from you two. Away from the ships." He looked down at his hands. "That power I used, Kurama's power, it's not mine. It belongs to a being sealed inside of me. A being of immense power that I barely understand. Using it feels like setting my own soul on fire. And I'm afraid that one day, I'll use it and won't be able to come back." He had finally given voice to his deepest fear. He had laid himself bare before them, stripped of his title, his power, and his bravado. He was just Naruto, a man carrying a burden he was no longer sure he could bear alone. He felt a hand on his left shoulder. It was Tashigi's, her grip firm and steady. Then, a hand on his right. It was Hina's, her touch cool and reassuring. He looked up, and they were there, one on each side of his bed, their expressions devoid of pity, filled only with a profound, shared understanding. "Then you will not have to bear it alone," Tashigi said, her voice unwavering. "Hina will be your cage," Hina added, a small, genuine smile gracing her lips for the first time. "To help you contain your fire. Not to extinguish it." Naruto looked at their faces. At the fierce loyalty in Tashigi's eyes and the steadfast strength in Hina's. The cold, empty space in his chest began to fill with a warmth that had nothing to do with chakra. It was a connection, forged in the fires of battle and tempered in the quiet vulnerability of its aftermath. He reached up, placing his own hands over theirs. Their shared moment of quiet solidarity was broken by a sharp rap on the door. A communications officer entered, his face pale and grim. He held out a den mushi, its shell lacquered in the pure white and gold of the highest authority. "Admiral Koryu, sir," the officer said, his voice trembling slightly. "An urgent summons. From Mariajoy. The 5 elders require your immediate presence to account for the loss of the Azure Ring Archipelago." The warmth in the room was instantly replaced by an icy dread. Naruto, Hina, and Tashigi exchanged a look. The battle with the king was over. But a new one, a battle of politics, lies, and betrayal, was just about to begin. And this time, their enemy wouldn't be a faceless monster. It would be the very system they had sworn to serve. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The Betrayal at Mariajoy. The Sent to the Holy Land of Mariajoy was a journey into a different reality. They traveled via the colossal government-operated elevators that climbed the sheer face of the Red Line, leaving the chaotic, churning seas of the world below. As they rose, the air itself seemed to change. It grew thin, pristine, and carried a scent of manicured gardens and cold stone. It was the sterile air of a place that believed itself to be above the muck and grime of ordinary life. Naruto, flanked by Hina and Tashigi, stood in silence on the ascending platform. He wore his full admiral's regalia, the white and range coat, a familiar weight on his shoulders. But today, it felt less like a symbol of justice and more like a target. The brief, fragile peace they had found in the infirmary had evaporated, replaced by a cold, shared dread. They had made a silent pact before leaving. They would face this together, as a single, unified front. Hina's strategic mind was already running through political gambits and potential accusations. Tashigi's hand rested near the hilt of Shigur, her posture radiating a defiant readiness. They were escorted from the platform through immaculate courtyards and opulent marble hallways. Celestial dragons, in their ridiculous bubble helmets, were carried past on the backs of slaves, their vacant, cruel eyes glancing at the trio with disdainful curiosity. Naruto's fists clenched. Every fiber of his being screamed at the injustice of this place, the rotten core of the system he served. He had always known it was there, but he had believed he could change it from the inside. Now, he felt the walls of that system closing in on him. The audience chamber was a place of intimidating grandeur. It was vast, circular, and stark, designed to make any who entered feel small and insignificant. 5 ornate chairs were arranged on a high dais, and in them sat the 5 men who held the world in their hands. The 5 elders. Naruto recognized the tall, sword-wielding elder who had been a recurring figure of concern in his career. The others were equally imposing. A bald man with a magnificent mustache, a blond man with a long beard, a dark-skinned man with white dreadlocks, and a man with a prominent scar across his face. Their collective gaze was as heavy and unyielding as a mountain. Fleet Admiral Sakazuki stood to the side of the dais, his arms crossed, his magma-hot glare fixed on Naruto. He was not an ally, but a spectator waiting for a verdict. Admiral Koryu, the sword-wielding elder began, his voice a dry, ancient rustle. You were summoned to account for T.H. catastrophic loss of life in the Azure Ring Archipelago. An event of a magnitude not seen since the days of the Void Century. Naruto stepped forward. I have filed a full report. We were engaged by a previously unknown entity of immense power. A being the ancients called the Silent King. It possesses the ability to erase life and nullify both devil fruit abilities and haki. The blonde elder stroked his beard. An interesting tale, a ghost story, offered by an admiral to explain his failure to protect a million citizens of the world government. It is not a story, Hina interjected, her voice sharp and clear. A breach of protocol that made Sakazuki's eye twitch. Hina personally witnessed this entity. It nullified Hina's own abilities and those of her crew. So you claim, the mustachioed elder said, his tone dismissive. However, our own top scientists and intelligence analysts have compiled a different report. A report based on verifiable energy readings, timelines, and factual events. A massive screen descended from the ceiling behind the dais. A complex energy chart appeared, showing a series of violent spikes. The elder with the scar pointed a finger at the screen. Th. Is a reading of your unique chakra signature, Admiral Koryu. A power we have, until now, graciously allowed you to wield in the name of justice. This first spike corresponds precisely with your unsanctioned duel with the warlord, Gideon Rourke. And this second, much larger spike, he gestured to a colossal peak on the chart, corresponds to the exact moment the Azure Ring Archipelago was wiped clean. He leaned forward, his eyes cold and accusatory. The Silent King did not simply appear. The evidence is irrefutable. Your reckless and uncontrolled release of power created a catastrophic backlash. A wave of energy that annihilated everything in its path. You did not fight a monster, Admiral. You were the monster. The accusation was a physical blow. It was so perfectly twisted, so maliciously logical, that it momentarily stunned Naruto into silence. They were using his own power, the very thing he'd used to save his people, as the weapon to condemn him. Tashigi couldn't contain her outrage. That's a lie. He saved us. We were there. His power was the only thing that drove it away. The word of a loyal captain against the irrefutable data of our best scientists. The sword-wielding elder said with a thin, cruel smile. Your loyalty is commendable, Captain Tashigi, but it is clouding your judgment. He turned his gaze back to Naruto. Your very existence has proven to be a threat to the world order. Your unyielding hope is a childish fantasy that has led to untold destruction. Therefore, by the authority of the world government, you, Naruto Uzumaki, are hereby declared a traitor to humanity. You will be stripped of your rank and taken to the lowest level of Impel Down, where your power will be contained for the remainder of your life. 2 doors on either side of the chamber opened, and a full squadron of CP0 agents, their blank white masks hiding their killing intent, filed into the room, their weapons ready. This was it. The trap had been sprung. It was a perfect, self-contained checkmate. Any resistance would only prove their point that he was a violent, uncontrollable monster. But as the agents advanced, another, unexpected voice cut through the tension. What a load of horseshit. All eyes turned to the main entrance. Vice Admiral Smoker stood there, 2 massive cigars jutting from his mouth, his jeet resting on his shoulder. He walked into the sea. Hamber with a swagger that was pure defiance, his eyes, hard as flint, fixed on the 5 elders. Smoker. Sakazuki snarled. You were not summoned. This is a closed hearing. I heard you were put in. One of the only damn admirals who actually gets his hands dirty on trial, Smoker grunted, coming to a stop beside Tashigi. Figured I'd come and watch the circus. He blew a cloud of smoke towards the dais. I've seen Koryu fight. I saw what he did on Kajiro. He evacuated civilians and subdued an army of pirates with minimal casualties. It was unorthodox. It was messy. But it was justice. This is just politics. The sword-wielding elder's eyes narrowed. Your opinion is noted, Vice Admiral. And your insubordination will be dealt with. Now, stand aside. No, Naruto said, his voice quiet, but carrying an authority that made everyone, even the CP0 agents, pause. He had been silent, not in shock, but in thought. He was analyzing, processing, looking for the flaw in their perfect trap. And he'd found it. He looked not at the elders, but at Fleet Admiral Sakazuki. Fleet Admiral, you received my report from G8, did you not? Sakazuki grunted an affirmative. I did. A report filled with the same nonsense about a silent entity. And when did you receive that report? Naruto pressed, his blue eyes sharp and focused. What was the time stamp on my initial discovery of the abandoned fortress? Sakazuki hesitated, a flicker of confusion crossing his grim face. He clearly didn't see the relevance. Approximately 0800 hours, 3 days ago. Naruto nodded, then turned his gaze to the massive screen. And the timeline for my duel with Rourke. The first spike that supposedly started all of this. One of the elders, sensing danger, tried to intervene. This is irrelevant. It is everything. Naruto cut him off, his voice ringing with power. Show me the time stamp. Reluctantly, the data was brought up. The duel with Rourke had taken place at 1700 hours on the same day. 9 hours after Naruto had discovered the already erased fortress of G8. A stunned silence fell over the chamber. The lie had been exposed. The Silent King was real. G8 was proof that it existed and had acted before Naruto's duel. Their perfect narrative had just been shattered by a single, undeniable fact that they had overlooked in their haste to frame him. Naruto looked back at the elders, a cold, dangerous fire in his eyes. You faked your evidence. You twisted the truth. You were willing to let a monster that can erase islands roam free, just to get rid of me because you're afraid. You're not protecting the world. You're protecting your own power. The sword-wielding elder's face was a mask of cold fury. The trap had failed, but his resolve had not. Your logic is a clever trick, but it changes nothing. Your power is a threat. The ruling stands. Arrest him. The CP0 agents surged forward. Sakazuki, his face a complex mixture of fury at being used and rigid adherence to the chain of command, did not move to stop them. Naruto sighed. He had hoped for justice. He had hoped for reason. But the powerful seldom listened to either. I really didn't want to do this, he said. He brought his hands together. Multi-shadow clone jutsu. The chamber exploded into a chaotic sea of orange and white. Hundreds of Narutos appeared in an instant, flooding the room, overwhelming the CP0 agents not with violence, but with sheer, confusing numbers. It was a perfect diversion. In the confusion, the real Naruto grabbed Hina and Tashigi by the arm. Go, now, we're not leaving you, Tashigi yelled, drawing Shiger. Hina's cage belongs with the one it protects, Hina stated, her arms already crossed, black bars forming at her fingertips. Naruto looked at them, at their unwavering loyalty, and a genuine, determined grin finally returned to his face. Okay, but we do it my way. No killing. He didn't need to. The clones were a disorienting, non-lethal force, creating a path through the chaos. Smoker, with a grim smile, slammed his jeet into a group of agents, his smoke logia form creating even more confusion. Get out of here, you damn fool, he yelled, and try not to destroy my planet while you're at it. Quote, Naruto, Hina, and Tashigi broke for the exit. The elders screamed orders from the dais, but it was too late. Naruto was a force of chaos and hope, and he had just been unleashed from his cage. They burst out of the audience chamber and into the pristine hallways of Mariajoy, alarms blaring all around them. They were no longer an admiral, a rear admiral, and a captain. They were fugitives, enemies of the world, and for the first time in a long time, Naruto felt a familiar, thrilling sense of freedom. The system was broken, so he would just have to fix it from the outside. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The Unlikely Alliance. The pristine marble hallways of Mariajoy were a blur of panicked, screaming nobles and the disciplined, masked faces of CP0. Alarms shrieked a symphony of chaos. In the heart of it, Naruto, Hina, and Tashigi were a three-person hurricane, a force of calculated mayhem moving with a single purpose: escape. They'll have the elevators locked down. Hina yelled over the din, her mind already 5 steps ahead, processing layouts and guard rotations. The port will be swarming with vice admirals within minutes. There is no logical point of egress. Who needs a door when you have a window? Naruto shot back, a wild, almost joyful grin on his face. He felt alive, the stifling hypocrisy of the Holy Land, a weight lifted from his shoulders. He burst through a set of ornate double doors onto a wide balcony overlooking the world. They were thousands of feet in the air, the clouds a soft blanket far below them, the sea a distant, hazy blue. The wind whipped at their clothes, a roar of pure freedom. "Are you insane?" Tashigi gasped, her knuckles white where she gripped the balcony railing, her fear of heights warring with the immediate danger behind them. "We'll be killed. Trust me," Naruto yelled. He grabbed both their hands, his grip firm and reassuring. He pulled them onto the railing with him, the drop a terrifying, dizzying void beneath their feet. He didn't hesitate. "See you at the bottom." He leapt, pulling them with him into the abyss. Tashigi screamed, a raw, terrified sound swallowed by the wind. Hina's eyes widened, but she didn't make a sound, her analytical mind simply accepting the new, insane tactical reality. They fell. The world rushed up to meet them. Naruto, holding them tight, brought his other hand to his mouth and bit his thumb. He flew through a series of hand seals so fast they were a blur. Summoning jutsu, he roared into the wind. He slammed his palm onto the empty air. A massive, complex seal exploded into existence beneath them, and in a colossal puff of smoke that would have dwarfed a battleship, they were no longer falling. They were standing on the broad, warty, and very surprised head of a giant red toad wearing a blue happy coat and carrying a massive tonto on his back. "Naruto, what the hell?" Gamakichi bellowed, his deep, rumbling voice a mixture of annoyance and concern as he plummeted through the sky. "You can't just summon me in the middle of a, hey, is that the red line? We're falling off the red line. Just a little change of scenery, Kichi." Naruto yelled back, grinning at the giant toad. "Can you get us down to the sea without turning us into a pancake?" Gamakichi grumbled something about disrespectful blonde idiots but angled his descent, using his massive body to catch the wind, slowing their fall from a suicidal plummet to a controlled, if terrifying, glide. They hit the water with a monumental splash, the impact sending a wave out for miles. When the spray settled, the giant toad was treading water, and Mariajoy was a distant speck on the horizon. The world learned of their escape in less than a day. Morgan's World Economic Journal ran a headline that spanned the entire front page, accompanied by a grainy, dramatic photo of the explosion of smoke from Naruto's summoning jutsu. Admiral Koryu, Hero or Demon. Yellow Dragon flees Marriage. OIS after accusations of mass destruction. The story, expertly spun by the Five Elders propagandists, painted a damning picture. It spoke of an admiral whose mysterious and unstable power had gone rogue, an internal investigation that had turned violent, and a brave escape by a man now considered the single greatest threat to global security. The truth of G8 and the Silent King was buried, Dizumi. SSED is a delusional fantasy, created by Koryu to cover his tracks. The world was terrified, and the world government had its perfect scapegoat. On a small, forgotten island in the West Blue, in a sea cave hidden behind a waterfall. The three fugitives read the news with grim expressions. "They are controlling the narrative completely," Hina stated, her voice cold with fury. "In the eyes of the world, we are now the villains. So we fight them," Tashigi said, her hand resting on Shiger. "We find the Silent King, we expose the truth, and we clear our names." "It's not that simple," Naruto said, pacing the damp floor of the cave. "The king is a global threat. The elders are a global power. We can't fight a war on two fronts. Not alone." He stopped, his back to them. "We need help. We need allies." He turned, a determined light in his eyes. "Hina, I need a secure channel. A frequency only a handful of people would ever know about. I need to talk to Smoker." Vice Admiral Smoker stood in the rain on the deck of his warship, docked at a heavily fortified marine base. He listened to the quiet crackle of the den mushi in his hand, his face unreadable. And that's the situation, Hina's voice concluded from the other end. Naruto-kun believes we cannot do this alone. Hina agrees. We are asking for your help, Smoker-kun. But we understand the risk. This would be treason. Smoker took a long drag from his cigars. Treason, he grunted, blowing a plume of smoke that was instantly devoured by the rain. The old men in that fancy room committed treason when they decided to bury a monster to protect their own asses. That's not justice. It's cowardice. He looked back at the members of his G5 unit, a rough, loyal, and fiercely protective bunch who were gathered behind him. They had heard everything. Their expressions were a mixture of shock, anger, and a dangerous, simmering readiness. My justice is my own, Smoker said into the snail. It doesn't answer to 5 old fossils in a throne room. Where do you need us? Their next stop was a floating bastion of steel and gold, the impounded flagship of Gideon Rourke's fleet, currently held in a low-security government drydock. Getting aboard was laughably easy for Naruto. A single clone for distraction, a quick, silent infiltration, and they were standing before the heavily chained door of the ship's brig. Gideon Rourke sat on a stone bench inside, looking more bored than imprisoned. When Naruto entered, the giant man looked up, and a slow, dangerous grin spread across his face. The fallen Admiral, Rourke rumbled. Come to finish the job. Or have you come to join me in chains? Neither, Naruto said, tossing a small, intricate key through the bars. It was the master key for Rourke's own ship, which Naruto's clone had lifted from the warden's office. I'm here to make you an offer. Rourke caught the key, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. I am listening. The people who gave you that warlord title, ones who used you as their attack dog whenever it suited them. They're the same ones who just tried to frame me for a catastrophe I was trying to stop, Naruto explained, his voice level and direct. They are cowards who rule from the shadows. You and I, we're different. We face our enemies head on. There's a real threat out there, a thing called the Silent King, and it's a danger to everyone, pirates, marines, everyone. The elders are ignoring it to consolidate their own power. He met the warlord's gaze. I'm putting together a team to fight the real enemy and expose the liars at the top. I'm not asking you to be a hero. I'm offering you a chance to hit back at the people who think they own the world. And I'm offering you a real fight. A battle worthy of your strength. Rourke was silent for a long moment, weighing the key in his massive hand. He thought of his defeat, a clean, honorable loss to overwhelming power. Then he thought of the politicians who had used him, their soft hands and their forked tongues. He stood up, a mountain of muscle and pride, and unlocked his own cell door. The world government is a stagnant swamp, Rourke declared, his voice a low growl of contempt. And you, Admiral, are a maelstrom. It will be far more interesting to ride the storm than to rot in their cage. He stepped out of the cell, a newly freed titan. My fleet, and my fists, are yours. The final meeting was the most dangerous. It took place on a storm-shrouded island in the New World, a known haunt of the Revolutionary Army. Naruto, Hina, and Tashigi stood in a clearing, surrounded by the silent, hooded figures of revolutionary soldiers. A woman emerged from the shadows to greet them. She was tall, with sharp, intelligent eyes and silver hair cut in a severe, practical style. She introduced herself only as Cleo, a regional commander for the Revolutionary Army. We have been monitoring your situation with great interest, Admiral that is no longer an admiral, Cleo said, her voice calm and measured. Your public defiance of the 5 elders has caused a delightful amount of chaos. But we are not allies. You represent a system we have sworn to destroy. That system just tried to execute me, Naruto countered. Right now, we don't have to be friends. We just have to agree on who the bigger enemy is. Is it a corrupt government? Or is it a monster that can erase entire countries in a matter of minutes? Hina stepped forward, taking the role of the diplomat. The Silent King does not distinguish between ideologies, Commander. It will consume your revolution just as readily as it will consume the world government. We have a plan to fight it. A plan that requires a diverse coalition. Your network of intelligence is unparalleled. We need your eyes and ears. We need to know where the elders are moving their pieces, so we are not caught in a pincer between 2 wars. Cleo was silent, her sharp eyes studying them. And what does the Revolutionary Army gain from this? If you succeed, you may simply replace one corrupt system with another. If we succeed, Naruto said, his voice ringing with conviction, we expose the lie at the heart of the world government. We show the world that their celestial leaders are fallible, corrupt, and willing to sacrifice them for power. We will create a crack in their foundation. What your revolution chooses to do with that crack is up to you. That was the argument that won her over. Not an appeal to shared values, but a sound, strategic proposition. A common enemy, and a mutually beneficial outcome. Cleo nodded slowly. Very well, we will provide the intelligence. For now. But know this, Naruto Uzumaki. When the silence is defeated, the storm will still be here. And it will break upon the shores of the world. In a vast, opulent cavern on Gideon Rourke's hidden island headquarters, the most unlikely war council in the history of the world was assembled. Naruto stood at the head of a massive golden table. Around him sat Hina and Tashigi, Vice Admiral Smoker, representing a faction of disillusioned Marines, Gideon Rourke, a warlord and his pirate captains, and a shadowy communications expert from the Revolutionary Army. Feeding Cleo's intelligence to Hina. It was a coalition of bitter enemies, united by a single purpose. All right, Naruto said, looking at the faces around the table. Here's the plan. He wasn't just a powerhouse anymore. He was a leader, a unifier, the charismatic center that held this impossible alliance together. The king is drawn to my energy. So I'm going to be the bait. We're going to pick the battlefield. A place far from any civilian populations. We draw it out into the open. While you engage the primary threat, Hina continued, pointing to a strategic map, our combined fleets will form a perimeter. Smoker's unit and Rourke's forces will handle any government fleets that try to intervene. Our revolutionary contact will feed us their movements in real time. Our goal isn't just to win, Naruto concluded, his gaze sweeping across his new allies. It's to win so loudly and so publicly that the world can't ignore it. We record everything. We broadcast everything. We show them the monster the elders tried to hide, and we show them us, Marines, pirates, and revolutionaries, fighting together to save them. It was a bold, insane, brilliant plan. A strategy to save T. He whirled and shatter a corrupt system in a single, decisive stroke. Meanwhile, in the cold, silent chamber in Mariajoy, the sword-wielding elder looked at a new report. Koryu had freed Rourke. He had made contact with Smoker. Their intelligence hinted at a meeting with the revolutionaries. He is building an army, the elder with the scar hissed. His charisma is a plague. Then we will create a cure, the sword-wielding elder said. His voice colder than steel. He pressed a button on his desk. Send them in. The doors opened, and a new unit of 5 individuals entered. They were not CP0. They wore sleek, black armor inlaid with what looked like veins of sea prism stone, but they glowed with a faint, sickly green light. Their faces were hidden behind helmets that offered no hint of the person within. They moved with a silent, synchronized grace that was deeply inhuman. The Justicar unit is now active, the elder announced. Their armor is forged with a refined psycho-receptive alloy. Developed from studying your reports on the Silent King. It does not just negate devil fruit powers. It feeds on energy, haki, chakra, it matters not. The stronger the opponent's will, the stronger they become. He looked at the silent, armored figures. Your target is Naruto Uzumaki. You will not capture him. You will not defeat him. You will drain him until he is nothing but a soulless husk. Go, deliver our absolute justice. The 5 Justicars bowed as one, and then vanished into the shadows, a new, specifically engineered nightmare unleashed upon the world. Chapter 9 End. Chapter 10. The Maelstrom and the Silence. The chosen battlefield was a place of ghosts and gods, God Valley. The infamous island, erased from all official maps, was a place where legends had once clashed, its Rai name a whisper of world-shattering conflict. Naruto and his alliance had chosen it for its isolation and its symbolic weight. It was a graveyard of ambition, the perfect stage for a final, desperate battle for the world's soul. Their fleet, a motley, impossible armada of gilded pirate ships and grim marine warships, formed a wide, defensive perimeter miles from the island's shores. Revolutionary. Why spies fed them real-time intelligence. 2 government fleets, led by hardline vice admirals loyal to Akainu, were converging on their position. Smoker and Rourke, standing on the shared bridge of the Gilded Fist, prepared to meet them. A pirate and a marine ready to fight side by side against their former comrades. At the center of it all, on the rocky, desolate shores of God Valley, Naruto stood alone. Hina and Tashigi were with him. But they stood back, 100 yards behind him, an honor guard for the man who was about to become a lightning rod. This part of the plan was his and his alone. Ready? Hina asked, her voice calm and steady over the small den mushi clipped to his collar. Ready, Tashigi's voice added, a fierce undercurrent of belief in her tone. Naruto took a deep breath, the salty air filling his lungs. He closed his eyes, reached deep within himself, and opened the floodgates. He didn't activate Sage Mode. He didn't call on Kurama. He simply let his own massive, life-filled chakra signature flare out, a brilliant, golden beacon of pure energy. It was the roar of the golden sun, a deliberate, defiant challenge screamed into the void. I'm here, the signal said. Come and get me. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, the world began to change. The wind died. The waves on the shore stilled, their sound ceasing. A creeping, oppressive silence fell over the island, a familiar, soul-crushing hush that was more terrifying than any battle cry. The air in front of Naruto began to shimmer, to distort like heat haze. The Silent King materialized from nothingness, its tall, featureless form a hole in reality. It had come, but it was not alone. From the shadows of the island's jagged rock formations, 5 figures emerged, moving with a silent, synchronized menace. They were the Justicars, their black, glowing armor absorbing the very light around them. They took up positions between Naruto and the king, forming a semicircle, their intent clear. They were not allies of the king. They were a third party, an engineered variable in this cosmic equation. The sword-wielding elder's voice, cold and triumphant, crackled to life over the government fleet's comms. A frequency he knew the fugitives would be monitoring. Behold, Naruto Uzumaki, the end of your childish rebellion. You cannot fight 2 gods at once. You will be consumed by the silence you awakened, or you will be drained into nothingness by the justice you defied. Either way, the world will be quiet once more. The king tilted its head, its faceless gaze assessing the new players. The Justicars raised their hands, a sickly green energy crackling at their fingertips. 2 fronts, 2 enemies, each a perfect counter to his power. Naruto looked at the impossible situation, and he did something the elders in their cold, calculating rage could never have anticipated. He smiled. You're right, he said, his voice calm and clear, a simple statement to Hina and Tashigi over the comms. I can't fight them both. He took a single, deep breath. But we can. He brought his hands together in a familiar seal. Shadow Clone Jutsu. In a puff of smoke, a single clone appeared beside him. But this was not a simple clone. Naruto poured a vast amount of Kurama's chakra into it, and the clone shimmered, its form encased in the same fiery, 9-tailed avatar he had used in the Azure Ring. It was a colossal being of pure, violent energy. The Kurama clone roared, a psychic shockwave of pure life, and charged directly at the Silent King. The ancient entity, recognizing its true nemesis, turned its full attention to the chakra beast. And the battle of something versus nothing began anew, a titanic, silent struggle of opposing realities. The real Naruto, now free to face his other foes, turned to the Justicars. All right, guys, he said, cracking his knuckles. Round 2. The Justicars didn't speak. They moved as one, a blur of black armor. Their attacks were not meant to injure, but to make contact. One of them lunged, and Naruto sidestepped, but the Justicar's hand brushed his arm. He felt it instantly, a sickening, leech-like pull. A fraction of his chakra was siphoned away, flowing into the Justicar's armor, making its green veins glow brighter. They were fighting a living battery. The more he fought, the stronger they would become. But then, he was not alone. 2 figures land, Ed on either side of him in a spray of gravel. Hina, her face set in a grim line, her arms already weaving a cage of black bars. Tashigi, Shigur drawn and gleaming, her stance low and ready. Hina's cage is not for you, Naruto-kun. The rear admiral said, her voice like ice. It is for them. Your fight is with all of us, Tashigi added, her eyes blazing. The battle erupted on 3 fronts. Miles out at sea, the fleets clashed. Smoker's smoke and Rourke's cannonballs tore into the government lines, a chaotic but effective dance of pirates and marines fighting for a common cause. On the island, the colossal Kurama clone wrestled with the Silent King, a spectacular, silent light show of creation versus oblivion. And on the rocky shore, the 3 fugitives faced the 5 assassins. It was a fight of perfect synergy. Naruto was the spearhead, his Sage Mode speed allowing him to evade the Justicar's energy-draining touch. He wasn't trying to land blows, he was a master of evasion, a golden blur that drew their attention. Hurting them, forcing them into predictable patterns. Hina was the strategist, the controller. Her cages erupted from the ground, not to trap the Justicars, their armo. R seemed to phase through solid objects, but to corral them, to shape the battlefield, to force them into Tashigi's path. Ori no Saku, she would command, and a wall of black bars would force a Justicar to alter its course. Right into a planned kill zone. Tashigi was the blade, she was the only one who could truly harm them. Their armor was designed to absorb energy, but a physical cut, a piece of sharpened, hockey-infused steel, was an attack it couldn't process. She moved like a dancer, a whirlwind of silver and black, her blade finding the joints in the armor, the weak points Hina's strategy exposed. A Justicar lunged for Naruto, only to be met with a wall of bars from Hina, and in that split second of hesitation, Tashigi was there, her blade slicing through the armor at its neck. The Justicar convulsed, its green light sputtering, and collapsed. They were a single, seamless unit, their bond not just tactical, but emotional. Hina's cool logic, Tashigi's fierce heart, and Naruto's unyielding hope. All working in perfect concert. They had become more than just allies. They were a family, forged in the fires of a world that had rejected them. Naruto saw an opening. 3 Justicars remained, their movements growing more desperate. He created a Rasengan, but instead of attacking, he threw it at the ground in front of them. The explosion kicked up a massive cloud of dust and rock, a temporary smokescreen. Now, he yelled. Hina understood instantly. Kumo no Su. A massive, complex spiderweb of black bars shot through the dust cloud, an inescapable net. The Justicars were snagged, their phasing ability overwhelmed by the sheer density of the cage. Tashigi was already moving. Her body was a blur as she shot through the web, her blade flashing 3 times, each strike a poem of precision and power. The remaining Justicars fell, their green light extinguished for good. As the dust settled, they stood panting, victorious. But the fight wasn't over. A roar from the Kurama clone drew their attention. The clone was flickering, its chakra being steadily consumed by the Silent King. It had served its purpose as a distraction, but it couldn't win. Naruto dismissed the clone, its remaining energy flowing back into him. He stood before the Silent King once more, the 3 of them united. This time, he said, we end it. Together. He knew he couldn't destroy it with power. Power was its food. He had to overwhelm it with something else. Not just his life force, but the life force of everyone it had tried to erase. He had to remind it of what the world truly was. He entered Sage Mode, but he didn't gather energy to attack. He reached out, his senses expanding beyond the island, beyond the battle at sea, across the entire world. He felt the fear, the confusion, but also the hope. He felt the fighting spirit of Smoker's men, the wild pride of Rourke's pirates, the quiet determination of the revolutionaries. He felt the prayers of civilians who had seen the broadcast, a project Rourke's engineers had set up, and were now witnessing a truth their government had tried to hide. It's not about noise, Naruto whispered, his eyes closed. It's about connection. He became a conduit. He drew upon the will of his alliance, the hopes of the world, every ounce of positive, life-affirming energy he could touch. It flowed into him, a tidal wave of emotion, of life, of sound. Hina and Tashigi placed their hands on his back, adding their own strength to the torrent, their own unwavering belief in him. The energy didn't form an attack. It formed a wave, a massive, world-spanning wave of pure, unadulterated life. It wasn't an attack designed to destroy the king's silence, it was a song meant to overwhelm it. He unleashed it. A golden wave of light and sound erupted from him, washing over the island. Over the Silent King. The king recoiled, its form distorting violently. It was not in pain. It was in agony. The beautiful, chaotic, messy, vibrant song of a living world was anathema to its very being. It could not consume it. It could not negate it. It could only flee. The silent king's form unraveled, dissolving not into nothingness, but into a million points of light, a final, silent scream against the dawn. It was gone, defeated not by a fist, but by a chorus. As the golden light faded, a new dawn broke over God Valley. The silence was gone, replaced by the triumphant sound of the sea. The aftermath was a revolution. The broadcast had done its work. The world had seen the truth. They had seen the monster the elders had hidden. They had seen the Justicars, the government's assassins. And they had seen pirates, marines, and revolutionaries fighting as one to save them. The world government was thrown into chaos. The 5 elders were exposed, their authority shattered. A massive schism tore through the Marines, with Smoker leading a powerful faction demanding reform, backed by the surprising political weight of the newly exonerated Gideon Rourke, who had found a new, more interesting game to play than piracy. The Revolutionary Army seized the opportunity, fanning the flames of dissent across the globe. In the midst of this new, chaotic, and hopeful world, on the deck of the Gilded Fist as it sailed into a brilliant sunrise, Naruto stood with Hina and Tashigi. His admiral's coat was gone, left behind in the dust of Mariajoy. He was no longer an admiral. No longer a fugitive. He was just Naruto. Hina leaned against the railing beside him, her usual composure softened by a rare, gentle smile. Tashigi stood on his other side, her gaze fixed on the horizon. A look of serene confidence on her face. So, what now? Tashigi asked, her voice filled with the thrill of endless possibility. Naruto looked at the 2 women who had stood by him, who had faced the end of the world with him, and who had pulled him back from his own despair. He reached out, taking both of their hands in his. Now, he said, his grin as bright and brilliant as the rising sun. We build something new, our way, our justice. He looked out at the endless ocean, a world in turmoil, a world ready to be reshaped. His adventure, their adventure, was just beginning. Chapter 10 End.